A man drenched in blood signs a contract, not with ink, but with his own hand sliced open. The rain came down like judgment, hard and fine, washing the city into a smear of neon and ash. On the terrace of a building that forgot how to feel safe, Adrian Vale stood under a single naked bulb that hummed like an exposed nerve. The bulb threw a weak cone of light over the mahogany table where a single sheet of paper lay waiting, sterile and absurd against the filth of the night. The paper would become law tonight, not of courts or contracts read in daylight, but of debts paid in darkness. Adrian's palms were slick, not with rain. He flexed his fingers and felt the tiny heat of fresh wounds. The cuts were shallow where they needed to be shallow, wide where they needed to bleed. He had done the ritual a dozen times in his head, and none of it prepared him for the physical taste of metal on his tongue when he bit back a cry and watched the spatter fall onto the document. It spiderwebbed across the fibers, an ugly, intimate signature forming where his hand had traced the words he refused to let himself speak aloud. No one saw him when he carved his name. That was the point. A billionaire's signatures were currency. His was now currency paid in a different coin. He had lived long enough to know that men with money could buy laws, buy loyalty, buy silence. They could not buy what Elena Cruz had bought for him: time. She had given him a second chance, then walked away with a smile and a list of questions in her pocket. That smile had become a lit match. The men who came for the deal were not men so much as shadows wearing suits. They arrived with the civil patience of predators and the clinical efficiency of accountants who also happened to hide guns in their briefcases. Marcus Delane was the eldest of the shadows, his face cut from the same comfortable cruelty that made men survive boardroom murders and street-level slaughters without blinking. He had a way of asking for favors that sounded like an invitation and tasted like an ultimatum. He liked to sign things in gold pens. He liked to look at other people's wounds and catalog them like rare books. "You know why you're here, Vale." Marcus hovered over the table with a presence designed to intimidate and soothe in the same breath. A steel cup of whiskey sat between them like a neutral country. Marcus never drank. He enjoyed the gesture. His voice did not rise. It did not have to. Adrian didn't look up. The paper drank the dark circles beneath his eyes. "You set the terms," he said. The words scraped out like someone else's announcement. "I sign. You keep your end. And you keep hers." Marcus's mouth made the shape of a smile, but it did not reach his eyes. The implication was a knife masquerading as a handshake. "You know the cost, Adrian. You know we don't do clean favors. You understand how this world pays." Adrian did. He had understood it the night Elena had bled into his palms after two men decided that saving a stranger was not in their interest. He remembered the way she had pressed a bloody hand to his chest and laughed, a short, incredulous sound, because someone had to laugh if they were going to keep breathing in a city that ate hope. She had vanished into alleys and headlines after that, wearing a reporter's stubbornness like armor. She had rebuilt the fracture in him without knowing she'd done it. She had given him a reason to be more than a ledger of debts and victories. That was why he was here, under the bulb, cutting himself with the ritualistic care of a penman. "You can't save her without destroying yourself," Marcus said, as if reading the wound on his wrist. It was both a statement and a doctrine, an arithmetic of sacrifice hard calculated and coldly delivered. The fact of it sat like a stone in Adrian's throat. Adrian laughed, but it was not a laughter of triumph. It came out thin, a flint struck against a tomb. "Then I'll burn the world first." Marcus's eyes flicked to the wet street below where the city's heartbeat continued in the small, indifferent thumps of taxis and late-shift traffic. The man understood fire. He understood what happens when someone with everything to lose decides to set themselves alight. For Marcus, the spectacle would be profitable even if it killed everyone else. They signed. The motion was ceremonious even in its brutality. Adrian took a pen, a cheap thing, an affectation so the symbolism would cut deeper, and bled onto the seal. The ink of the contract swirled, and then disappeared into the red. The paper drank it greedily, and where the blood spread it looked less like a signature and more like a map of a life being erased. The words of the pact were simple, merciless. Protection in exchange for all debts, known and unknown. A vow made concrete by the most human of currencies. For a moment, as if the city itself were holding its breath, a silence fell heavy enough to be heard. If contracts signed at daylight bind men to law, those signed in blood bind men to fate. Adrian understood this with a clarity that made him dizzy. He had not come to this because he wanted to keep Elena safe so much as because he wanted to keep himself tethered to an idea of redemption that might distract him from the monstrous ledger of his past. He had convinced himself that protection could be a penance. He had convinced himself of many things people convince themselves of when they do not want to look at who they have been. Outside, a siren wailed and then passed, a ribbon of sound that gestured briefly toward a different life. Adrian ran his thumb through the drying line of blood. It came away sticky, dark, and impossible to scrub clean. He felt the hand of the pact on his shoulder already, the cool inevitability of it. Marcus folded the paper with the casual cruelty of a man who had folded men before. "We'll keep it," he said. "But remember this, Vale. The world will not forget your debt is ours to call in. And debts like this have a way of finding their due at the worst possible moment." Adrian stood, the chair scraping across the stone like a whispered threat. He could have folded as Marcus had, could have placed the contract in a drawer and pretended he had purchased absolution. He could have walked away and let the city do what it always did, chew up pieces of men and move on. But the thought of Elena, her hair lashing at her face when she ran, her laugh cutting through smoke-filled air, tightened something in him that had been soft and broken for years. He would rather die in a blaze he started than live forever under the silent judgment of what he'd allowed. As he left, the rain took up where the bulb left off and tried to wash the paper clean, but paper remembers. Ink and blood both have a stubbornness to them. He pulled his collar up against the cold and walked into the city, the contract folded like a secret against his ribs. Every step felt like a step deeper into a room where the walls might close without warning. That night the city slept with one more sin stitched into its seams. Adrian walked under its indifferent lights with a vow in his pocket that felt less like salvation and more like an invitation to damnation. Somewhere, a woman he loved was unwittingly walking through the same streets, brushing up against danger as if it were ordinary. He had signed for her safety, and in doing so, he had signed away his own. The promise sat heavy and hot against his heart, a curse given back to himself in the name of love. Welcome my beautiful family and friends to my YouTube channel. Please click on the subscribe button, like, comment, and share this video. Thank you specially for sticking around to this very moment. Now back to the story. The city had changed in the months since Adrian signed his fate in blood. Or maybe it only looked that way from where he stood. From the top floor of Vale Industries, the skyline stretched like a blade, sharp and glittering, built on silence and secrets. But beneath that gloss, the city still pulsed with the same quiet menace, smoke curling from its alleys, sirens echoing like memories that refused to die. Adrian Vale watched it all through floor-to-ceiling glass that turned him into his own reflection, a ghost looking down at the empire he had built, the empire now rotting from within. He had bought himself time, nothing more. The deal he'd made in blood had kept Elena Cruz alive, yes, but it had also chained him to men who smiled like friends and killed like accountants balancing ledgers. He had learned to live with the weight of that choice, until tonight. Because tonight she came back. Elena Cruz. The name still burned the back of his throat when he said it, even in silence. He'd seen her face first on a news stream, framed by rain and camera flashes, a microphone trembling in her hand as she tore into one of his shell companies with the quiet precision of someone who knew exactly where to cut. She wasn't chasing rumors this time. She was coming for him. For Adrian Vale. He turned the screen off before she could finish her sentence, but it was too late. The sound of her voice had already pulled something awake inside him, something he had tried to bury the night he sold his soul to keep her breathing. Now, she was back, not as the woman who had once saved him, but as the weapon sent to destroy what little he had left. And still, watching her move through his world, the silk blouse, the measured confidence, the fire behind her eyes, He couldn't decide whether to silence her or save her again. 2 floors below, the elevators whispered open. His security chief, Mercer, stepped out, his face unreadable. "She's at the press conference," he said. "She's not bluffing this time. She's got files, Adrian. Real ones. Names, transfers, timestamps. If she publishes—" "I know what happens," Adrian said, cutting him off. His voice was calm, but the glass trembled slightly in his reflection. Mercer hesitated. "We could make it disappear. Quietly." Adrian's eyes lifted, cold, haunted. "No." "Then what do you want to do?" Adrian turned back toward the city. "Watch her." Mercer frowned. "Watch her?" "Yes," Adrian said, almost absently. "Every step, every move, every word." It wasn't strategy. It was hunger disguised as caution. Later that night, his penthouse lay drowned in darkness except for the soft blue flicker of a dozen monitors, every one showing Elena from a different angle. Street cameras, hotel feeds, the press building's rooftop lens. Adrian had wired half the city after the deal, paranoid that his own demons would crawl back through the cracks. Now they showed him her, walking through the city like she owned its secrets, her face caught in the sodium glow of streetlights, her hair brushing her collar like smoke. She had changed. The laughter was gone, replaced by something quieter, a determination that frightened him more than her rage ever could. He leaned closer to the screen as she sat across from a man in a gray coat inside a dim cafe. The man's face was obscured by steam and shadow, but Adrian could feel it. The wrongness, the deliberate anonymity. He froze the frame. Zoomed in. The man's hand rested on the table, fingers tapping once, twice, 3 times. A rhythm Adrian knew too well. Marcus Delane. The ghost behind the deal. The man he thought had disappeared. The realization slid into Adrian's gut like ice. Marcus was feeding her information. He was turning Elena into a weapon aimed directly at him, and she didn't even know it. Elena's voice came through the speakers as Adrian unmuted the feed. "If I expose Vale, this city burns," she said quietly. "But maybe that's the only way to clean it." Marcus's reply was too soft to catch, but his smile said enough. Adrian's hand clenched around the edge of the desk until his knuckles went white. He wanted to shout through the glass, to tell her she was walking into a trap, that the man feeding her truth was the same one who had orchestrated his ruin. But the irony tasted bitter. He was the one who'd kept her alive by making a deal with that very devil. He had become her enemy the night he chose her life over his soul. 3 hours later, Elena's apartment lights flicked off. Adrian watched her silhouette move through the window, watched the faint tremor in her hand as she poured herself a drink. It wasn't the gesture of a predator. It was exhaustion, loneliness. She still talked to herself when she thought no one could hear. "You shouldn't have come back," Adrian whispered to the glass. "Not here. Not now." But even as he said it, he knew the truth. He didn't want her to stop. Her presence was dangerous, yes, but it was also the only thing that made him feel alive again. The same woman who could ruin him was the only one who had ever seen him beneath the gold and rot. He stepped away from the screens and walked to the window, staring down at the city that hummed like a machine built from sins. Somewhere out there, she was building a story, one that could end him, or free them both. He lit a cigarette, though he hadn't smoked in years. The smoke curled upward, tracing her name in the air. Behind him, the elevator chimed. Mercer's voice echoed from the dark. "Boss, we've got movement. Someone's targeting her. One of Delane's men." Adrian's pulse stilled. "Where?" "Outside her building. They're waiting for her to leave." For a moment, Adrian didn't move. He stared at the city, the reflection of his own face fractured by the glass. Saving her would mean revealing himself, breaking the fragile truce he'd built. Silencing her would mean losing what little humanity he still had. 2 impossible choices, and both of them already written in blood. He dropped the cigarette, crushed it under his heel. "Send the car," he said quietly. Mercer hesitated. "You're going after her?" Adrian's mouth curved, not quite a smile. "No," he said. "I'm going to make sure she lives long enough to hate me. Outside, thunder rolled across the skyline. In a small apartment 3 blocks away, Elena Cruz looked out at the same storm, her fingers tracing the rim of her glass. Somewhere deep down, beneath her anger and her mission, a memory tugged, a hand pulling her from a pool of blood years ago, a voice whispering that she was safe. She told herself it was just the rain. But in the window's reflection, behind her own face, something flickered, a shape watching from the street below. And for the first time in months, she felt a shiver that wasn't from fear. It was recognition. The ghost in silk had returned, and somewhere above the city, the man who sold his soul for her had just decided the war wasn't over. The restaurant was suspended between heaven and the city's veins, 50 floors above the ground, where the skyline glittered like a crown built from sin. The table sat by the window, draped in white linen, a single candle trembling at its center. Its flame flickered every time the wind brushed the glass, as if it, too, knew this wasn't a dinner. It was a reckoning dressed in silk and charm. Adrian Vale had arrived early. He always did. The maitre d', nervous and discreet, had already been paid not to look too closely, not to ask why the Billionaire had reserved the entire rooftop dining hall for 2 people who had once loved each other like a promise and hurt each other like a crime. He adjusted the cuff of his tailored jacket and glanced at his reflection in the window. The city stared back, all chrome and chaos, a mirror of his own design. His hand hovered near his pocket, where a small, encrypted drive rested. It contained everything Elena Cruz thought she wanted. Proof of corruption, evidence of betrayal, and his confession hidden beneath it all, coded into lines only she would know how to read. If she chose to. If he lived long enough for her to find out. The elevator chimed. He didn't turn immediately. He didn't need to. Her presence hit him before the sound of her heels did, a disturbance in the air, sharp and quiet. When he finally looked, Elena stood framed in the golden light of the elevator door, wearing black silk that caught the candlelight and threw it back like armor. Her hair was pinned carelessly, a few strands falling free to soften the edges of her resolve. "Mr. Vale," she said, her voice smooth but not gentle. "I was starting to think you'd run out of nerve." Adrian's lips twitched into something like a smile. "You know me better than that." "I used to," she said. He gestured to the table. "Dinner?" Her eyes swept the room, empty except for them. No audience. How thoughtful. Trying to make sure no one hears the lies. Or the truth, he countered. It's easier that way. She took her seat across from him. Between them, the candle trembled again. For a moment, neither spoke. The silence was its own kind of violence, one born of words unsaid and memories neither dared to touch. Finally, she broke it. "You invited me here because you're scared." He raised a brow. "Of what?" "Of losing control of the story. You think if you feed me a few confessions, I'll stop digging." Adrian leaned back, studying her. "Would you?" Her laugh was soft but brittle. "Not a chance." He poured the wine himself, the red liquid glinting like spilled secrets. "Then why come?" Elena met his gaze. "Because I wanted to see if the monster still had a heartbeat." That one hit its mark. His fingers tightened around the stem of the glass. "You think I'm a monster? I think you made a deal with devils and forgot which side you were on. And you think you're on the right side?" "No," she said quietly. "But at least I can sleep at night." The waiter, silent, precise, appeared with their first course, but neither touched it. The air between them was already thick enough to choke on. Adrian finally spoke, voice low, dangerous in its calm. "You're in over your head, Elena. You're chasing ghosts that will bury you. Walk away." Her eyes narrowed. "Is that a threat?" "It's a warning." "From you," she scoffed. "You made your bed with killers, Adrian. You don't get to play the hero now." He leaned forward, his tone soft but cutting. "You think I don't know what they are? I signed that contract with my own blood. You think I did it for profit?" She hesitated, just slightly, and he saw it, that flicker of doubt behind her eyes. "Then why?" she asked, her voice quieter now. He looked down at his glass. "Because you wouldn't be alive if I hadn't." That froze her. The city noise below seemed to fade, leaving only the sound of her breath. "You're lying." He met her eyes. "You already know I'm not." The confession landed between them like a blade. For a heartbeat, she looked as if she might cry. Then the mask slid back into place. "You saved me to own me," she said coldly. "That's not love. That's control." Adrian's jaw tightened. "If I wanted to own you, you'd never have walked in here tonight." Their gazes locked, neither yielding. It was chess played with emotions, every word a move, every silence a trap. Elena broke first. She reached into her bag and slid a folded document across the table. "I know about Marcus Delane," she said. "About the offshore accounts, the payoffs, the deal you made the night your car exploded." Adrian's eyes flicked to the paper, but he didn't touch it. "Careful," he murmured. "The deeper you dig, the closer you get to people who don't mind burying you next to him. Then let them try." The candlelight flickered, reflecting the defiance in her gaze. It was the same fire that had drawn him to her years ago, the same fire that would one day burn them both to ash. He smiled faintly. "You haven't changed." "And you have," she said. "You used to fight for the truth." "I still do," he said softly. "Just not the same way." Then something shifted, a glint of light, too sharp, too precise, cutting across the window glass. Adrian's instincts fired before his mind caught up. He followed the reflection, a faint, dancing red, that slid across the white tablecloth, climbing slowly toward her chest. "Elena." She frowned. "What?" He didn't let her finish. Adrian lunged across the table, knocking her chair backward as the first shot screamed through the glass. The world shattered in an instant. The candle exploded, the table split, the sound of gunfire and shattering crystal blending into chaos. They hit the floor together, glass raining down like diamonds in hell. Elena gasped, clutching at him. Another bullet tore through the bottle on the table, spraying red across the white linen. Wine or blood, or both. "Stay down," Adrian hissed, shielding her with his body as the city's cold wind howled through the shattered window. He scanned the skyline. The sniper was out there somewhere, hidden in the maze of lights. He could see the faint glint of metal from a rooftop across the street. His hand went instinctively to his jacket, pulling a small pistol free. Elena's voice shook. "You planned this." He met her eyes, furious, terrified, alive. "If I had, you'd be dead." The shooter fired again. The bullet grazed his shoulder, spinning him sideways. Elena grabbed his arm, dragging him behind the fallen table. "Who are they?" she shouted over the wind. Adrian's breath came hard. "Someone cleaning up the mess Marcus left behind." "You mean our mess," she said bitterly. He almost smiled. Even under fire, she had to have the last word. The restaurant lights flickered. Somewhere below, alarms began to wail. Adrian pressed his back against the wall, blood running warm down his sleeve. He looked at her, the woman who could end him, the woman he had ruined himself to protect. "Next time," he said through gritted teeth, "you pick the restaurant." A final bullet cracked the glass above them, scattering sparks. He grabbed her wrist, pulled her toward the service exit. The city screamed below, and the night swallowed them both, two ghosts fleeing through a storm of glass and lies. Behind them, the candle flickered one last time before the wind snuffed it out. The elevator dropped like a stone through the veins of the city, metal grinding, lights flickering, the air thick with the scent of smoke and gunpowder. Elena's heart hammered against her ribs as Adrian held her close, his hand pressed to her back, his own blood seeping warm between them. Neither spoke. The silence in that metal cage felt louder than the bullets that had chased them there. When the door slid open, they stepped into a different world, cold, sterile, humming with the low thrum of hidden machines. The Panic Suite wasn't on any map. It was buried beneath Vale Tower, like a secret the earth itself had agreed to keep. Elena stumbled forward, her heels echoing against concrete. "Where are we?" she demanded, still shaking from the gunfire. Adrian swiped his palm over a scanner. The walls came alive, steel panels sliding open to reveal dim lights, monitors, and shelves lined with files. "Safe," he said, voice low, strained. She spun to face him. Safe? You call this safe? We were nearly killed, Adrian. He didn't answer. He moved with the precision of a man who had been here many times before, stripping off his jacket, rolling back his sleeve to inspect the bleeding gash in his arm. His jaw clenched, his movements mechanical, almost rehearsed. Elena's eyes darted around the room. It wasn't just a bunker. It was an obsession. Every inch of the wall was filled, not with blueprints or financials, but photographs. Dozens of them. Hundreds, maybe. Of her. Her walking down crowded streets. Her leaving her apartment. Her sitting at a cafe, unaware of the camera's gaze. Her smiling once, faintly, under the glow of a street lamp. Each one dated. Organized. Catalogued. Elena's breath caught in her throat. What is this? Adrian froze. She moved closer, running her trembling fingers over one photo, herself from 2 years ago, laughing in a newsroom. You've been following me? Her voice cracked. Watching me? He turned slowly. His face was pale under the sterile light, the kind of pale that comes from years of keeping ghosts. It wasn't like that. Then what was it like? She snapped, spinning to face him. Because this, she gestured to the wall, looks like obsession, Adrian. Or guilt. Or both. He took a step toward her, but she flinched back. His voice dropped to a rasp. Every deal I made, every life I took, it was to keep you alive. Her laugh was bitter, hollow. To keep me alive? You think stalking me was love? He shook his head, eyes dark and raw. It wasn't love. It was penance. That word hit her like a blow. Penance for what? She demanded. He looked past her then, toward the wall, as if the faces there could absolve him. You deserve the truth, he said quietly, even if it kills what's left between us. She folded her arms, trying to steady the tremor in her voice. Start talking. He exhaled, long and unsteady. The night I made that deal, the blood pact, it wasn't to save you. That's what I told myself to sleep at night. But the truth, his voice cracked, the mask slipping. The truth is I did it to avenge your father. Her blood ran cold. My father? He nodded once. You were too young to know what kind of man he really was. He wasn't just a journalist, he was one of us once. He built stories from shadows, traded truths for power. Until he tried to expose me. Elena's stomach twisted. You're lying. I wish I was, he said softly. He found out about the syndicate deal before it began. He was going to leak everything. I tried to stop him. I warned him, begged him to walk away. He wouldn't. Adrian's voice trembled. So Marcus made the decision for both of us. The words settled heavy in the air. Elena's mind raced. The accident. The explosion that had killed her father, the one no one had ever been arrested for. She'd told herself it was corruption, bad luck, fate. Never him. Her breath came short. You knew. He nodded. I knew. I was there when it happened. Her hand shot up, trembling. Don't. Her voice was raw, shaking. Don't you dare tell me you were there. I tried to stop it, he said, his voice breaking now. But I didn't. I hesitated. I watched your father die, because I was too much of a coward to choose a side. That was my sin, Elena. Her knees buckled. She caught herself on the table. She couldn't finish. The words wouldn't come. Rage and grief tangled in her throat until all that came out was a whisper. You killed him. Adrian stepped forward. No. Yes, she screamed, turning on him. You did. Maybe not with your hand, but with your silence. You let it happen. You let him die. He didn't argue. He only stood there, the truth eating him alive. Tears blurred her vision as she looked around the bunker again. All those pictures, all those years he'd watched her live a life built on his guilt. So, what was the pact for, then, she demanded? To make yourself feel like you'd paid the price? It was to destroy Marcus, he said quietly. To make sure the man who ordered it never touched you again. And you think that makes you good? She spat. You think that erases what you did? He shook his head. No. Nothing erases it. For a long moment, the room was silent except for the hum of machines. The candle from the dinner still flickered faintly in her mind, that fragile light between them, now long dead. Elena took a slow step toward him. "You could have told me," she said. "You had years. You could have told me the truth." He swallowed hard. "I wanted to. Every day. But I thought protecting you meant keeping you blind." She stared at him, the realization sinking in that every kindness, every warning, every so-called act of love was just another layer of his penance. "You don't get to decide what protects me," she whispered. "You took that choice away the same way you took my father." Adrian's voice cracked. "Elena." "No," she stepped back. "You don't get to say my name like that anymore." The pain in her voice hit harder than the bullets ever could. He didn't follow when she turned away. He knew he couldn't. At the door, she paused, trembling, her reflection caught in the steel. "You were my salvation once," she said softly. "Now you're just the reason I can't forgive myself for ever loving you." The door hissed open. Adrian stood motionless, his hand pressed against the wall of photographs, his silent cathedral of guilt. The monitors flickered, showing her retreating through the corridor, her figure growing smaller with each frame. He whispered to the empty room, "I didn't save you to be forgiven. I did it because I couldn't live knowing I hadn't tried." But the walls didn't answer. They only stared back, covered in her face, frozen in the moments before she knew what he'd done. And for the first time in years, Adrian Vale felt the full weight of his sin, not as a secret, but as the truth that had finally torn the last good thing from him. The first thing Elena felt was the cold, sharp and metallic, biting through her skin like teeth. Her wrists were bound, her head pounding. The air reeked of gasoline and damp concrete. Somewhere nearby, water dripped in steady, mocking rhythm. When she opened her eyes, she saw the faint glimmer of a warehouse skylight high above, fractured glass letting in threads of dawn. Her breath came in short, shallow bursts. She tried to move, but the ropes cut deep into her skin. Then she heard it, a voice she hadn't heard in years, smooth as silk, sharp as a knife. Well, Marcus Delane drawled from the shadows. The infamous Elena Cruz. "I can't decide whether to congratulate you for surviving Adrian Vale or pity you for ever loving him." Elena's pulse spiked. "Marcus." She spat the name like poison. He stepped into the light, expensive suit dusted with grit, his cufflinks catching the dim glow. Time hadn't softened him. It had honed him into something even colder. "You know," he said conversationally, crouching beside her, "I never believed Adrian had the spine to betray me. But love makes even monsters stupid." Her glare didn't waver. "You think this will break him?" He smiled. "Oh no. This isn't about breaking him, my dear. This is about ending him." He tossed a phone onto the floor beside her, the screen already ringing. Adrian's name glowed across it. Marcus picked it up and hit speaker. "Vale," he said, his tone amused. "I have something of yours." The line was silent for a moment, then Adrian's voice came through, calm, lethal. "If you touch her—" "Please," Marcus interrupted, laughing softly. "You're in no position to make threats. You see, I don't want her dead. Not yet. I want you, your empire, your fortune, every bloody cent you bled this city for. And when I have it, then maybe I'll decide what happens to her." Elena closed her eyes, her heart pounding. Adrian's voice came low, dark. "You think money is what's keeping you alive right now?" Marcus chuckled. "Oh, Adrian. Always the romantic, even when you're cornered. I know you, remember? You'll come for her. And when you do, you'll walk straight into your own grave." The call ended. Elena stared at Marcus, defiant despite the fear clawing at her chest. "He'll come for you," she said. "You know that, don't you?" Marcus smiled. "That's the idea." Across the city, Adrian Vale stood at the top of his tower, staring down at the burning skyline. His reflection in the glass was barely human, eyes hollow, shirt streaked with blood. He had just lost control of his company's main server, his security network hijacked, his men scattered. Marcus hadn't just taken Elena. He'd taken everything. Adrian's phone buzzed again. A text. A single line, midnight. Pier 47. Bring it all. Or bring a coffin. Adrian's knuckles whitened around the phone. He had built an empire on fear, on ruthlessness, on control. But now, none of it mattered. There was no negotiation, no diplomacy, no saving face. There was only her. He turned to the safe built into the wall and unlocked it. Inside were three things: a black pistol, a small flash drive, and a blood-stained photograph. Elena, years ago, laughing in the sun. He loaded the gun, pocketed the drive, and walked out. Tonight, he would burn the world he built. The storm rolled in by the time Adrian reached the docks. The city's glow reflected off the churning water, broken glass and rain pooling on the asphalt. He moved like a phantom, one-manned against an army. Marcus's men waited in black SUVs, weapons drawn, faces hidden behind tactical masks. But they weren't ready for him. The first bullet cracked through the storm like thunder. Adrian moved with cold precision, each shot deliberate, each movement efficient. He tore through his own security forces, men who had once called him sir, now falling to the ground as their own guns turned against them. The air filled with smoke and screams. The scent of oil and cordite clung to him like sin. In the warehouse, Marcus watched from a security monitor, smirking as he poured himself a glass of whiskey. "You see, Elena," he said over the rising gunfire, "this is what happens when you love the devil. Eventually, he burns for you." Elena strained against the ropes, her voice raw. "You're afraid of him. That's why you hide behind screens." Marcus's expression twitched, the faintest crack in his composure. "Afraid?
No.
I just know better than to underestimate a desperate man." Outside, explosions rocked the pier, fuel tanks igniting under Adrian's assault. The entire dock was on fire now, a hellscape of orange and smoke. He stepped through the chaos, his black coat torn, his hands bloodied, his gun empty. But his eyes burned with something darker than vengeance: purpose. When the last of Marcus's men fell, Adrian kicked open the warehouse door. The sight that greeted him froze him in place. Elena, bound to a chair, bruised but unbroken. And behind her, Marcus, holding a gun to her head. "Drop it," Marcus said, "or she dies first." Adrian didn't move. His gun hung loosely at his side, smoke still curling from the barrel. "Let her go." Marcus smirked.
"Funny.
"I told you the same thing once years ago about her father. Remember?" Adrian's jaw tightened. Elena's voice broke the tension. "Adrian." "Quiet," Marcus hissed, pressing the barrel harder against her temple. "You think she loves you, Vale? She's been digging through your sins. She knows everything. The blood, the deals, the lies. You think she'd still look at you the same if she knew what I saw that night?" Adrian's hand twitched. "Don't." "Oh, but she should know," Marcus whispered, grinning. "The night her father died, you weren't just there. You helped me pull the trigger." Elena's eyes widened, tears spilling down her cheeks. "That's a lie," Adrian snarled. Marcus laughed. "Is it? Or do you just wish it was?" The silence that followed was unbearable, a heartbeat stretched to eternity. Then Adrian moved. A flick of his wrist, a flash of steel, and the knife hidden in his sleeve flew through the air. It cut across Marcus's hand, slicing deep. The gun fired, the shot went wide, Elena screamed. Adrian lunged forward, tackling Marcus to the ground. The two men crashed through the debris, fists and fury colliding. Years of betrayal boiled over into chaos. "Everything you built," Marcus hissed, blood pooling from his lip. "You built on my back." Adrian's voice came through his teeth like gravel. "And everything you destroyed, you did because you couldn't stand being replaced." The struggle ended with a gunshot that echoed across the docks. Marcus fell still. Adrian stood over him, chest heaving, rain washing the blood from his face. Elena was free, shaking, her wrists raw from the ropes. She looked up at him, the man who had just saved her life by tearing his world apart. He dropped to his knees beside her, hands trembling. "I told you," he whispered. "Every life I took was for you." She looked at him, the devil she once loved, and for a heartbeat, her anger broke under the weight of something deeper. But behind them, the flames roared higher, consuming the pier. The hunter had saved his prey, but now the fire was coming for them both. And somewhere in the smoke, Marcus's last words still lingered like a curse. Even devils can't outrun their sins. Rain fell in sheets, thick and cold, washing over the burning pier like the world itself was trying to cleanse what it had just witnessed. Smoke coiled through the stormlight, tasting of metal and fire, whispering the ghosts of every sin Adrian Vale had ever committed. He moved through the ruin like a shadow, staggering, half blind from the pain. His suit was shredded, his hands slick with blood. Some his, some not. The gun hung loose in his grip, its last bullet spent. The echo of that final gunshot still haunted the air, but the silence that followed was worse. Somewhere in the distance, flames crackled, the twisted remains of Marcus Delane's empire collapsing into the sea. The devil had finally fallen, but Adrian wasn't looking for Marcus anymore. Elena, his voice broke, raw and frantic, swallowed by thunder. He found her near the edge of the dock, half buried beneath a fallen beam, her body still, her dress torn and soaked crimson. For one awful second, he thought she was gone. Then her fingers twitched. Adrian dropped to his knees beside her, shoving the debris aside with trembling hands. "Stay with me," he whispered, pressing his palm over the wound in her stomach. Blood seeped through his fingers, hot and unstoppable. She looked up at him through the rain, eyes glassy, but still burning with that impossible fire. The same fire that had ruined him, saved him, and damned him all at once. "You came," she breathed. Her voice was a thread, barely there. He laughed, a hollow, desperate sound. "You thought I wouldn't?" "You shouldn't have," she murmured, a faint smile ghosting across her lips. "You always run toward the fire." "I told you," he said, brushing a wet strand of hair from her face. "I'd burn the world if I had to." Lightning split the sky. For a moment, everything froze, the world, the rain, the pain. Just him and her, two souls too broken to exist apart. Elena coughed, the sound wet and sharp. "Adrian, don't," he said quickly. "Save your strength. I'll get you help." But even as he said it, they both knew there was no help left. Her hand found his wrist, weak but insistent. "Listen to me," she whispered. "You can't undo what's written in blood, but you can rewrite what comes next." The words cut deeper than any blade. Adrian's throat tightened. He wanted to tell her she'd be fine, that the ambulance was on its way, that they had time, but lies had built his life, and now, at the end, he couldn't stand to speak another. "Elena," he said quietly, voice shaking. "There's something I need to tell you." She blinked slowly, the light in her eyes dimming. "What is it?" He hesitated, and for the first time in years, fear rooted him. Not the kind that came from bullets or betrayal, but the kind that came from truth. "The night your father died," he began, his voice barely audible over the storm, "I told you Marcus pulled the trigger. That part was true." She frowned faintly, confusion cutting through the haze. "But the order," his breath shuddered out. "The order came from me." Her body tensed beneath his touch. For a moment, she didn't breathe. Neither did he. "What?" she whispered. He bowed his head, eyes closing as if the confession itself was a blade pressed to his throat. It was supposed to be a message, just fear, not death. But Marcus, he never did restraint. When I found out what he'd done, it was too late. The words poured out like poison, unstoppable, each one heavier than the last. "I tried to protect you after that. Everything I did, the blood, the lies, the pact, it was all because of that night. Because I owed you a life." Tears mingled with the rain on her face. "You killed my father." Adrian's voice cracked. "I kill myself the moment I did." Silence fell between them, the kind that swallows sound and breath alike. The fire hissed as the rain tried to kill it, the sea below swallowing what was left of the light. Elena turned her head weakly, looking out over the water. "All this time," she said, barely audible, "you thought saving me would make you clean." He nodded once, brokenly. "It didn't." Her lips trembled, not in anger, but something worse. Grief. I should hate you. You should. And yet, she reached up, fingers brushing his jaw. You're still here. Her touch undid him. His eyes burned as he leaned closer, pressing his forehead to hers. I never wanted redemption. I just wanted you to live. But what about you? She asked softly. He smiled, the kind of smile that hurt to see. Men like me don't get to live. We just last a little longer than we should. She tried to speak, but her breath hitched. Blood stained her lips. Adrian pressed his hand harder against the wound, desperate, shaking. No. No, stay with me. Please, Elena. Her eyes fluttered open, finding his one last time. You said you'd burn the world for me. I did. Then promise me, she whispered, you won't let it burn you too. He didn't answer. He couldn't. She smiled faintly, a ghost of peace, and her hand slipped from his cheek. The world went quiet. For a long time, Adrian didn't move. The rain soaked through him, cold and relentless, washing crimson streaks into the sea. The fire had died, but inside him, everything was still burning. He looked down at her, the only thing in his life that had ever been pure, and something inside him broke cleanly in two. He reached into his jacket and pulled out the pistol, the one bullet left in the chamber. He'd saved it, though he didn't know why. Now he did. He lifted her hand, pressed it against his chest, over the heart that had damned them both. I'm sorry, he whispered, for everything. A voice echoed in his mind, hers, soft, defiant. You can't undo what's written in blood, but you can rewrite what comes next. He looked out over the sea, the sky cracking open with lightning, and made his choice. Redemption wouldn't come from forgiveness. It would come from sacrifice. He pressed the barrel to his heart. Somewhere far away, sirens wailed. Too late. I love you, he said, and pulled the trigger. The shot was swallowed by thunder. When the storm cleared, dawn rose pale and hollow. The fire was gone. The pier was empty, save for two bodies side by side. One bathed in rain, the other in peace. And for the first time in a lifetime, Adrian Vale's world was finally quiet. The city had stopped screaming. For the first time in years, the skyline was silent. No sirens, no fire, no pulse of violence echoing through the alleys. The empire that once towered over everything had turned to ash. Adrian Vale's name, once whispered with fear and power, was now spoken only in past tense. They found his body beside Elena's, rain-washed and still, a gun resting loosely in his hand. The police called it murder-suicide, the tabloids called it tragedy, but Elena, when she woke in the hospital 3 days later, called it something else entirely. A release. The bullet meant for her had grazed her ribs, sparing her by inches. His, however, had not missed. When she read the coroner's report, she didn't cry. The tears had come before. In the fire, in the confession, in the quiet breath between life and death. By the time she learned the truth, she had no tears left. Just silence. And silence, she realized, was what Adrian had wanted all along. 3 months later, the city began to forget him. The billboards came down, his holdings were seized, and his once-glass empire, Vale Industries, became a ghost story. But Elena couldn't forget. She didn't try to. She sat in her apartment late at night, staring at her laptop as the cursor blinked over the title, The Billionaire's Sin. It wasn't just a story. It was an autopsy. Of love. Of greed. Of redemption bought too late. Each sentence felt like bleeding, but she wrote anyway. She wrote about the empire built on deceit, the men buried beneath contracts, the love that defied morality, and the confession that ended everything. When it was published, it tore through the world like wildfire. Readers called it haunting. Critics called it poetic. But those who knew truly knew called it the truth. And when the story went live, when the world finally saw the man beneath the mask, she turned off her phone and drove. The cemetery sat just outside the city, quiet and green, the earth still fresh over his grave. The name on the marble stone was simple. Adrian Vale, 1985 to 2025. In death, he found peace. Elena stood there in the gray light of morning, holding a bouquet of white lilies, his favorite. She knelt, the hem of her coat brushing the damp earth, and laid them down. "You once told me love was your weakness," she said softly. "You were wrong." Her voice trembled, but only once. "It was your redemption." The wind moved through the trees like a whisper. Somewhere far off, thunder murmured, faint, almost reluctant to return. That was when she saw it. A flash of white at the base of the tombstone. A single envelope, sealed with black wax, stamped with his insignia, the same emblem he used on every secret deal, every blood pact, every sin. She froze, her heart lurching. No one else knew that mark. No one else could. Her fingers trembled as she picked it up. The wax was cold, the paper damp but intact. On the front, in his sharp, precise handwriting, it read only one word: Elena. She looked around, but the cemetery was empty. Her pulse quickened as she broke the seal. Inside, a single folded letter, and something small, metallic, taped to the bottom corner, a key. She unfolded the letter and began to read. "My dearest Elena, if you're reading this, it means the story has been told, and I'm gone. I once believed the world could be controlled, that every choice, every sin, could be calculated, traded, contained. I was wrong. You showed me that love is chaos, the kind that burns, yes, but also cleanses. You said I couldn't undo what's written in blood. But maybe I could leave you something that wasn't written that way. This key opens a vault beneath what remains of Vale Industries, Tower B, Sublevel 3. You won't find money there. Or gold. What you'll find are files, names, dates, ledgers. Everything. The proof of every crime I ever buried, every man Marcus destroyed, every secret I tried to keep hidden for your sake. Use it. Not to destroy me, I've already done that, but to free yourself from the shadow I cast over you. Tell the truth. Then let me rest. If love is a sin, then this was my salvation. Adrian." The letter fell silent. Elena sat there, staring at the words, the ink slightly blurred by rain. Her breath hitched, slow and uneven. He had planned this. Even in death, he had left her the final piece, not of his empire, but of his atonement. She turned the key over in her hand. It was small, silver, old-fashioned, engraved with the number 7. The same number he used in his passwords, the same number etched onto the bullet casing she once found in his drawer. Her fingers clenched around it. She could have thrown it away, buried it with him, let his ghosts rot in peace. But that wasn't who she was anymore. That wasn't who he had died for her to be. She stood, tucking the envelope into her coat. The lilies fluttered in the wind behind her. "I'll tell them," she whispered. "All of it." The clouds began to break then, a sliver of sun cutting through the gray. It touched the marble, the flowers, her face, warm and faint, as if the city itself was finally exhaling. For a moment, she imagined him there, standing just behind her, in that perfectly pressed suit, that faint smirk tugging at his lips. She didn't turn around. "Goodbye, Adrian," she said instead. "And thank you for giving me back the truth." She walked away as the light spread slowly across the graves. That night, Elena drove to the ruins of Vale Tower. The upper floors were gone, glass and steel warped into blackened skeletons, but the foundation still stood, the bones of the beast refusing to die. She found the sublevel door, rusted but still locked. The key turned smoothly in the slot, as though it had been waiting. Inside, the air was cool and still. A single bulb flickered to life overhead, casting pale light on rows of boxes and ledgers, each stamped with Adrian's seal. She took a breath. Then she began to record. For hours, she read every file, photographed every secret, and built the story that would finally unmake the myth. The truth would not belong to him anymore. It would belong to the world he had hurt. When she left, dawn was breaking again. The city skyline, once bathed in fire, now glowed soft and gold. In the distance, the sea lapped quietly against the ruined pier where everything had ended. Elena stopped, looking back once, just once, and whispered the last line she would ever write about him. He loved me in blood, but saved me in truth. And for the first time, the story of Adrian Vale felt finished. Redemption written not in flame, but in ink. What would you do if the only person who ever truly loved you was also the one who destroyed your world? Broken heart, would you forgive the sin, or finish the story they started in blood? Thank you for watching the story to the end. Please click on subscribe button, like, and share this video. Share your thought in the comment. Click on the screen to watch the next one.